All right, so in 2 Samuel 9, this passage is so powerful. You guys are talking about falling. And this is absolutely a perfect passage to discuss the invisible mission field that I referenced to earlier, right outside of these doors. See, when we weren't in foster care, we didn't know anything about that world. We didn't realize how many kids there were. On any given day, over 400,000 kids in foster care. Over a period of a year, almost 700,000 kids come through the foster care system. I didn't know that. If I go to Publix today, I can't point out a foster child. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what a foster family looks like. I don't know what a relative caregiver family, that's grandparents who will take in their grandkids so they don't go into foster care. I didn't know what they look like. They're invisible. So what we want to do today is we want to show you this invisible mission field and really let God speak to your heart about what you can do. Because as Sandra said, everybody can do something. And Mephibosheth was Saul's grandson. Now, if you know the backstory, when all of these things were happening and Saul and his son died, Mephibosheth's caregiver picked him up and ran in haste and tripped and fell. Theologians aren't exactly sure how he became lame, whether he fell and broke his legs and they didn't mend right, or he fell and became paralyzed. Either way, he became lame. He was dropped, essentially. And there's so many kids that have been dropped by the very people who were supposed to care for them. And really, most children are removed because of neglect. And when there's a situation of neglect where dad lost his job, the power got turned off, they don't have water, it's really an issue of resources. That's where the church can come in and supply the resources. DCF doesn't want to pull a child out if all the family needs is resources. There are situations, though, where children are abused, and they do need to be removed. They've been abandoned, they've been abused and neglected. Essentially, they've been dropped by the very people who are supposed to care for them. The name Mephibosheth is really translated great shame or big shame. Children that have been removed of no fault of their own, they deal with shame. I have talked to children who feel like it was their fault that everything happened. And their parents are addicted to drugs or alcohol or prescription drugs and make bad choices. The child feels the shame. They feel like they've been labeled. If you think about it, when a new king comes into power, what they typically do is they wipe out all of the family members of the previous king. So Mephibosheth knew he was in big trouble. And not only was he in big trouble, he was lame. He couldn't really do much. And it says in this passage, as we read earlier, that he lived in a place called Lo Dabar. It's really two Hebrew words. It's Lo, which means nothing, and Dober, which means no pasture. And it's also, if you look at the root word of Dober, it's Debar, which means no promise. So really it means the place of no pasture and the place of no promise. And if you research Lo Debar, it was a place where criminals lived and went to. They were exiled to that area. It was not a good place to live, but that's where he lived. And if you can imagine a foster child, the average foster child nationally moves 3 to 5 times a year. 3 to 5 times a year. They live in the place of no promise. I call it perpetual uncertainty. They don't know what tomorrow holds. One of our children came into our home years ago, and we were his 5th foster home, and he was angry. And I'll never forget what he said the first couple days he was with us. We had a big yard. We had a lot of fun things to do, a lot of kids there. And he said, this place is boring. It's not boring at my house. But what he was saying was, I'm getting tired of this. And right after he said it was boring, he said, I'll probably have to just move again tomorrow. The place of no promise. No hope. That's how Mephibosheth felt. David comes on the scene. Absolutely bizarre to do this, but to say, is there anybody from the house of Saul that I can bless? Unheard of. How do you know we're called to reach the unreachable? Amen? We're called to get outside of ourselves and see, God, is there any more that I can do? Can I do more for you, Lord? Who can I bless? What if we got up every morning and said, who can I bless? Who's fallen through the cracks? Who's been overlooked? Who's been marginalized? Lord, can I do more? How often do we think about ourselves? How often do we focus on our own American dream and what we, our self-preservation? We need to get outside of ourselves. But I know that this church, and I know you all do believe, that we're called to reach out and to help those like Mephibosheth. And it says right here, it says that David called for Ziba and asked him, and then he brought Mephibosheth to the king's courts. And this is really interesting. Ziba means strength. It means to fight. It means an army. Who's going to fight for those who can't fight for themselves? Who's going to be the army? Who's going to speak up? And Ziba went and got this lame man and brought him to David. You are the army to go out and reach those who have fallen, who have been dropped, who have become lame, and bring them to the king. Amen? And if you look at David's name, and David's name means beloved or loved. How many of you are loved by the Lord? Well, you know what? We love because he first loved us. How would we know what love is if we didn't first experience his love? Don't we love because we've been loved? And David was the guy who got rescued from Goliath, from the lion, from the bear, from all of these things. And he knew it was God who did that for him. And now that he became king, he appreciated and was thankful for where he came from and what the Lord did, to the point where he said, Lord, I want to give back. Who can I help? Because he was loved, he showed love to the most unlovable person. Saul, who tried to kill him, this is his grandson. This guy could try to claim himself as the king of the rightful throne. He could try to come and pop up. That's why you would kill them. So he called for Mephibosheth to come to his court. And he says, I will restore everything back to you. How many of you know we're called to help restore broken lives? Amen. We're called to bring restoration, because it's not us that is restoring, it's Jesus. What I love about the church and the local foster care system is they need, the foster care system needs the church. The governor of this state is literally begging for churches to get involved. He realizes the importance of the church. Why? Why us? Because we're the church of Jesus. It's Jesus who brings the restoration, amen? It's Jesus who brings the healing. It's Jesus who brings the hope. We have Jesus. I mean, it's not just a civic group he's looking for, or some local community group. It's the church of Jesus. We have the answer. And it's right here. It's the hope of Jesus Christ. Mephibosheth comes before him, and he has great shame all over his life, carried in. He was literally carried to the table of the king. And Mephibosheth said, why would you even look at such a dead dog as I? That's how many people outside of those doors, in our zip code, right here in this area, in Volusia County, around 1,200 kids in foster care. And in James 1:27, it talks about pure and undefiled religion is to care for the orphan and the widow in their time of need, and to keep oneself from being unstained by the world. One of the greatest ways to stay unstained from the world is to get out of yourself and go reach the unlovable, the ones cast aside. And Mephibosheth felt like a dead dog. And David said, I'll restore everything back. You'll have land, will have people work the land for you, but you're going to sit at my table as if you were one of my own sons. What a picture, too, of the gospel. Amen? What a beautiful picture. How God takes us, full of shame and broken, and puts us at the table. There's a really interesting passage, I'm not going to read it, but it's in Judges, where this king named Adonai-Bezek, this evil king, would capture other kings, and he would cut off their thumbs and big toes, and he would put them under his table. It's in Judges. And he would put them under the table, and they would live off the scraps that fell from his table. They would get by. They would live, no longer able to grip, and no longer able to walk the same. They would lose their balance, and they would eat the scrap. Kings. And that's what the devil, the enemy, would want to do to not only you, but to those in our community who are hurting. They can't grip God's love for them. They can't hold on to hope. They lost their balance. They lost their way. And they need us to get them out from under the table and put them at the king's table as if one of his own sons. That's the gospel, amen? And as I finish up here, I just want you to ask yourself, what's God calling you to do? When we come into a church and you see a picture of 10 kids, and I've had pastors tell me, I've had people tell me, are you going to try to get me to do foster care? No, I don't try to get you to do anything. Not everybody's called to foster. We know that. Not everybody's called to take in 10 children. But how many of you know everyone's called to do something? We can all do something. And whether you bring a meal or you take in a child, it's the same in the eyes of the Lord. Some of these families need transportation. They need help to get to appointments. You drive a child to a therapy appointment. It's the same as taking in that child in the eyes of God. Well, it's not that big a deal. I can bring a meal. That's nothing. No, it's something. And if you're a foster parent, you know it's something when a hot meal shows up. Everybody can do something. So I'm asking you to ask the Lord to speak to your heart. Say, Lord, what can I do? Who can I bless? Who can I show kindness to? That's what David said. Amen. So we want to encourage you to come to the table, talk to us. We have a little sign up. We can get your information. We can pass it along to the leadership here. But as I finish, I want to do a quick comparison of two passages. I'm not going to bring them on the screen, but they're familiar to you. One is in Luke 8:22, and the other one is in Matthew 14:32. And it's an interesting comparison between these two stories. One of them, you have Jesus on the boat with his disciples, and there's a storm, and Jesus is asleep. And the disciples think they're going to die. And they wake Jesus up, seemingly frustrated. Don't you care that we're going to die? And he gets up and he rebukes the storm. That's in Luke 8. But if you look at Matthew 14, you kind of see the exact opposite story. Jesus is about to die. They're in Gethsemane. He's about to go to the cross. He's about to die. What are the disciples doing? They're asleep. He goes over, wakes them up, and says, can't you just stay awake for an hour? Isn't that interesting? They're basically the opposite story. And I thought about that. First of all, Jesus was able to sleep in a storm. You know why? Because he said, we're going to the other side of the lake. So if Jesus says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. Amen? If he has a promise over your life, if he told you something that is a promise, he's going to do it. Amen? Maybe you have prodigal children or grandchildren. Maybe you have something you've asked God to do and he says he's going to do it. Let me tell you, he will do it. Amen? He said we're going to the other side of the lake. He was able to literally sleep. You know, we have a storm supposedly coming, right? He could sleep in a mini hurricane. Why? Because he knew we're not going to drown. We're not going to die. We're going over there because that's what I said. Amen? But the disciples couldn't sleep. They were worried. They were full of fear. But in the other passage, Jesus is awake and they're asleep. What I'm afraid of is the things that keep Jesus awake. That night, what kept him awake? Souls. He was in travail over the fact that he was going to the cross. He was awake that night, but his people were asleep. I don't want to be asleep. I want to be awake for what keeps Jesus awake. I believe the church is awakening in these last days for more souls. Amen. For a great harvest of souls. Because the time is short. And like I said, the last couple verses of the Old Testament, he's turning the hearts of the children to the fathers to the children. He's coming back soon. He really is. And we need to awaken and not be asleep. And the Lord's awakening his body to James 1:27 and to the need of family and foster care and adoption right outside of our doors. And it's wonderful. It's exciting. And we're here and we're called to walk alongside you. We're here to work with you, whatever you need. But I'm telling you, with hundreds of churches in Volusia County, as more and more churches start getting on board and working in this area, we are going to change the foster care system. Put Jesus back in it. Somewhere along the way, we handed that over to the government, and it was really our job. Amen.